Good afternoon, classmates. This is Darren West, and I have chosen Excellence with Justice in Identification and Program from Chapter 11. I'd like to discuss disadvantaged and diverse students. There are multiple reasons that disadvantaged and diverse students are left out of the selection process of gifted education. They're less likely to have their needs in public school met because of heterogeneous grouping movements, political movements, and school reform, which eliminates gifted programs. There are multiple problems geared toward the elitist population that has made, with the tests being geared toward the elitist population, has made gifted programs vulnerable to attack. The resources are directed one way in order to cater to the elitists. The elitist definition practices leads to school segregation. They're designed to motivate and challenge is found in gifted programs, while mainstream curriculum is monotonous and boring. Okay? And that's another exclusionary problem, that there will be gifted, underprivileged children who are left in the mainstream classroom where they do not belong. Not 100% of the time. Schools place the most effective teachers in gifted programs also. So that's another reason that would make the gifted programs vulnerable to attack. Heterogeneous versus differentiation. Should we continue grouping or differentiation more freely? Because of the controversies, the best teachers being in the gifted programs, parents of other children are ready to attack the gifted programs at times. Because the controversies, responses by the field of education has led us to question whether heterogeneous grouping versus differentiation is best. Because what we currently have has resulted in reduced programs for the gifted, especially in districts with culturally diverse populations. Serving only the most gifted students favors white, higher class income students who typically perform well on IQ tests. There are other problems with the elitist definition. The elitist definition is used by most states and districts. It distinguishes between gifted and talented with the ability measured by the intelligence test, creativity, leadership, and abilities in visual and performing arts. These methods often exclude many students with high potential. It doesn't measure the true potential of all students from all backgrounds, especially if they come from underprivileged backgrounds, nor does it consider non-academic abilities, including creativity, passion, and motivation. Other problems with the elitist definition of giftedness is that the combinations of scores screen out the poor and the disadvantaged. Culturally diverse students who might otherwise show giftedness in some areas are left out because they don't perform well on standardized testing, and that's not enough to make a decision. Although these methods appear to be inclusive, they definitely are not helpful to disadvantaged students because of their reliance on traditional white middle class expectations. A lot of distortions exist. Teachers, parents, and test scores are biased. So teachers can be biased, counselors can be biased, test scores can be biased. So not only can things be biased, but people can be biased and things can be biased. Parental referrals often come from the elitist group. They think that their child should have a label as gifted, and they are admitted into the gifted program just to simply appease them and to promote the parent's own self-esteem. Some districts use combinations of test scores and teacher-parent recommendations. A Project Apogee was conducted. It had overwhelming statistics of underrepresentation in gifted programs. 30 New Jersey school districts of various sizes with 10 to 75% underrepresentation was studied. Underrepresentation of African American males was an outstanding, overwhelming 800% in some districts, and poor and culturally diverse students range from 2 to 60%. More than 3,000 students were identified for services, and more than 60% were culturally diverse. The project goal was to promote fairness in selection for all, equity, to guarantee that no one is overlooked, to protect civil rights. Pragmatism was applied to identify up to 25%. It's cost-effective modification of personnel. Pluralism, as many learners as possible were identified. And strategies. Strategies for testing should be identified. Precautions taken by the Apogee Project, appropriateness of tools used in Apogee to avoid misrepresentation of needs of the underprivileged. Because there is a huge variation of measures to identify, or there should be. There's not one, but there should be a variation. We needed to consider the appropriateness, the appropriate testing for the ability of the child. Just because the child doesn't pass the test doesn't mean that the child doesn't have potential ability. It means they haven't been given proper background, and they can easily still be gifted. Appropriate stage of identification goes with appropriate testing for ability. Is the student ready for this stage of testing in their identification process? It still doesn't mean that the child is not gifted. Appropriateness to disadvantaged groups typically are excluded in academic achievement. The project seeks to eliminate barriers accepted by the norm, such as the federal definition of giftedness. We have a federal definition, it's accepted, it's passed down to the states pass it down to the local districts. Local districts tend to seek white academic achievers that eliminate poor, culturally diverse, and limited English proficiency students. This is traditional. A lot of times districts think they have eliminated the problem when they have not. Males are below the 5th grade are excluded when identifying verbal ability, females when identifying mathematical ability, and intellectually creative students. All of this is omitted or misunderstood, and a student is not considered gifted because of one problem, and possibly a problem that was beyond their control because they've had no exposure to what they're being tested over. Still doesn't mean that the child does not have gifted potential. The project seeks to acknowledge bias and promote acceptance. It acknowledges bias in standardized testing, which there's a lot of. There's a lot of bias in standardized testing. It seeks to promote acceptance that admitting students with lower scores is necessary. There's nothing wrong with admitting students with gifted potential who have lower scores because it's justifiable, because we don't know the background of the student and the situation. And as I've repeated many times in this video, it still does not mean the child does not have gifted potential. Selecting 25% of students from each group expanded opportunities for everybody, not just for the underprivileged, but for white middle-class students as well. The results of the project concluded that application of its methods promotes equity and increases representation of underprivileged students. Look at the statistics. Overall increase in representation of culturally diverse students of over 500%. There was an increase in representation of economically disadvantaged students by over 600%. And here's a staggering statistic. Overall increase in representation for poor culturally diverse males by over 800%. So at the conclusion of the Apogee Project, the Global Institute for Maximizing Potential determined to expand equity and justice in public schools by developing services and research to counteract the increasingly negative impact of some national trends.